For your first fish tank, there's a lot to consider. You don't want to go too small, but at the same time you don't want to break the bank. So I'll go through a couple sizes that most people use. Here is an old 10-gallon tank that I used to house my tarantula. It's 10 gallons and it's basically the smallest. This is the bare minimum. This is basically the bare minimum of how big you can go for a fish tank. A 10-gallon can't really house much fish, maybe 2 or 3 community species, and that's basically it. So we'll talk about how many fish to put in a tank and further details. For most people, I would recommend a 20 to 30 gallon tank. These tanks are just in the minimum range, but they actually provide more space than a 10 gallon, and they're easier to work with. Basically, if you have a bigger tank, it's really easy, because if you have a smaller tank and you forget to feed your fish or you feed too much, it can actually pollute the tank faster than if it's in a bigger tank. So basically, if you have a bigger tank, it gives you more room to make mistakes, which most people make during their first tank. Now for how much fish to put in a tank. Usually people say 1 inch of fish for a gallon, but that doesn't really make sense, because if a fish is 10 inches long, which is pretty big, it definitely cannot fit into a 10-gallon tank. So my rule of thumb is 2 to 3 inches of fish per gallon. So let's say you get some community tank species. A tiger barb gets to about 3 inches long. Okay, so let's say you get 5 of them, so that's 15 inches. And then if you multiply by 2, because tiger barbs actually don't make a lot of waste, so they're actually a good species to put in a tank. So times 2, that would make 30. So you should have at least a 30-gallon to house 5 tiger barbs comfortably. Now, if you have a bigger tank, you can put more fish in, obviously. So that's why I say bigger tanks are better. I mean, if it were me, I would just get as much fish as I can, because that's just how I like them. But if you're comfortable with just housing like 1 or 2 fish in a 10-gallon tank, that's totally fine. But for me, I would choose a 20 to 30-gallon tank. The reason being for choosing such a large tank for most people is that it doesn't break the bank. It doesn't make you pay that much, and it houses fish more comfortably than a 10-gallon. So good places to buy tanks besides the pet store, because the pet store can sometimes get expensive. I often see tanks for sale at yard sales, but they're usually, 10 gallons. But usually, if you go to a yard sale, they usually have fish tanks there, because they might have given up the hobby, or it was too much of a commitment. So yeah, yard sales are definitely a good way to find tanks that are in good condition, usually. Another area to find tanks is your classified ads. A lot of people are willing to sell their tanks with lights and filter and gravel and stand, and they give you quite a bargain. For example, my 125-gallon tank downstairs, that is my biggest tank, I actually got off classifieds, and it was an amazing deal. It was only $300 for the tank, light, and stand, and that's I would say around a $1,000 value or more, because at PetSmart it was $3,000. So that was really good. I mean, I couldn't pass it up, so once I saw it on the ads, I just went to buy it, because that was an amazing deal. So if you want to go buy it at a pet store, that's also a good idea, because you get everything new and you can make sure there's no leaks or anything. So that's a good reason to go to the pet store. Another issue is floor space. If you don't have the space for such a big tank, then don't buy one. However, fish tanks weigh a lot, so you want to make sure that your floor can hold it, especially if you live in an apartment or a condo. So most floors should be able to hold a fish tank from 20 to 30 gallons. That's pretty much like a big sofa. So you want to usually place a fish tank against the wall, because usually walls have I-beams below them. But if you have a feeling that your floor might collapse under a fish tank, then you should call your local landlord or something. But usually, I'd say 10-gallon fish tank with stand and water in it probably could weigh at least 100 pounds. So you want to make sure that your floor can hold the tank, or that'll be a big problem. Another question to consider is if you can afford all the equipment. If you buy a really big tank, but you can't afford the heating and filters necessary for such a big tank, then don't even bother with such a big tank. Also, you might want to consider decorations. If you can't afford that much gravel or that much rocks and your tank just looks really ugly, then don't buy a big tank. Just buy a small tank and make it look good.